one finds in Herrnstein and Murray a remarkable similarity. They ask, inasmuch as cognitive deficit is related to job performance, and as minority workers, and I insert especially blacks, are entering professions with lower ability distributions than whites. Let me read this very slowly because it's awfully, awfully critical. They ask, inasmuch as cognitive ability is related to job performance, and as minority workers, and I insert especially blacks, and I'm back to the quotation now, and as minority workers are entering professions with lower ability distributions than whites, is there evidence of lower average performance for minority workers than for whites? They respond, calling attention to affirmative, no, they didn't respond. I say, calling attention to affirmative action, for example, they observe that, and they are talking now, the same degree, and again, I want to read this very carefully. Murray and Herrnstein say, the same degree may not have the same meaning for blacks, Latinos, and whites in terms of cognitive ability. In the NLSY, that's the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, in the NLSY, the black-white differences for every educational level, from high school diploma to PhD, are large, with the smallest being a difference of 1.2 standard deviations. Essentially, what Murray Herrnstein is saying, that the PhD degree of every black and Latino faculty member at UWM is inherently less valuable by measures of cognitive ability than the PhD degrees of their white counterparts. Given these differences in cognitive ability, and given the correspondence between cognitive ability and job performance, they say part of the reason that employers hire blacks and whites of differing cognitive ability may be because of pressures brought on them by governmental policies regarding representation of minorities. Without such pressures, and in a race-blind labor market, blacks and whites should be equal in those traits which best predict performance on the job. Absent governmental pressures to hire minorities, if a disproportion were to obtain between blacks and whites in job categories that are cognitively demanding, such disproportion would be fair, and attempts at, they say, correcting it, making it proportional, may well produce unfairness along with equal representation. Like de Gobineau and Carroll before them, Murray and Herrnstein perceive the majority of blacks to fit most neatly into societal roles that do not make weighty cognitive demands. Indeed, one observes in their text that of the approximately 30 million blacks in the society as of 1990, only 100,000, or 0.33 of 1%, fall into class 1 of their 5 cognitive classes, ranging from very bright to very dull. Class 1 where the IQ is 125 or higher. In a very real sense, at the end of the 20th century, IQ plays for Herrnstein and Murray the very same pseudoscientific role that the long since discredited brain weight did for Carroll at the end of the 19th century. And so, that is to say, provides an anchor for the purported intellectual inferiority of black people. And so, the sort of racial stratification grounded in the putative inequality of the races that one observes in de Gobineau and Carroll, one can also find in Murray Herrnstein, who decry anti-discrimination laws that sunder what they deem to be the proper relation between cognitive ability and societal role. The societal costs of cognitive deficit are profound, the quadrumvirate believe. De Gobineau informs us that mankind is divided into unlike and unequal parts, or rather into a series of categories arranged one above the other according to differences in intellect. Moreover, all civilizations derive from the white race, and none can exist without its help. Given the immense superiority of the white peoples in the field of intellect, and a society is great and brilliant only insofar as it preserves the blood of the noble group that created it, provided that this group itself belongs to the most illustrious white branch of our species. It is de Gobineau's belief that civilizations have been degraded by the loss of white dominance through what he calls the mixture of blood. We know today, of course, that strictly speaking, blood do not mix. Try mixing blood when you get an intravenous transfusion and see what happens. He notes that the small, this is de Gobineau, he tells us that the small have been raised through the mixture of blood. Unfortunately, the great have been lowered by the same process. And this is an evil that nothing can balance or repair. When mediocre men are at once created at the expense of the greater, they combine with other mediocrities. And from such unions, which grow ever more and more degraded, is born a confusion which, like Babel, ends in utter impotence and leads societies down to the abyss of nothingness, whence no power on earth can rescue them. Sharing de Gobineau's sentiments, Carroll writes, and Carroll incidentally quotes de Gobineau quite approvingly on more than one occasion. Carroll writes, mixed bloods are an unnatural production, and being altogether out of the common order of nature. They are simply monstrosities, no odds what their social, political, or religious standing may be. Even the atheist, who denies the existence of God and the inspiration of the scriptures, will insist that an amalgamation between whites and Negroes is a violation of natural law. Accordingly, so long as we, whites, allow the Negro and his amalgamated progeny imposed upon us as lower races of men, with whom we may associate on terms of social, political, and religious equality, just so long will we labor under the curses of God. Just so long will these degraded creatures have political domination over us. Of course, and you all know, those of you who have studied the period, that the theme of Negro domination was to be the battle cry of the anti-Reconstructionist forces. Just so long will these degraded creatures have political domination over us. Just so long will the youth and the manhood of the land be debauched by amalgamation. Just so long will the chastity of our wives and the virginity of our daughters be subject to their brutal assaults. De Gobineau and Carroll's sentiments find expression in Murray and Herrnstein's theme of dysgenics. They write, mounting evidence indicates that demographic trends are exerting downward pressures on the distribution of cognitive ability in the United States, and that the pressures are strong enough to have social consequences. In trying to foresee changes in American life, what matters is how the distribution of intelligence is changing more than why. In response to their own question, the question being, can we find evidence that dysgenics is actually happening? After citing a range of data they observe, the case is strong that something worth worrying about is happening to the cognitive capital of this country. The social phenomena that have been so worrisome for the past few decades may in some degree already reflect an ongoing dysgenic effect. It is worth worrying about and trying to do something about. In this regard, they note, for example, that there is a kernel of evidence that must be acknowledged, namely, that Latino and black immigrants, at least in the short run, are putting some downward pressure on the distribution of intelligence in the United States.